Morning. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. You're waking up now? Good. We should talk a little bit about other things that have happened, because that's what you're supposed to do at the beginning of meetings, is waste a few minutes talking about the things that are not important to the meeting, like the football game last night, or what you saw on telly, or the party on the boat. All those things are important to spend the first few minutes talking about so that your meeting takes a bit longer. So what I want to talk about today is really how we can have better meetings. My name's Neil. I work with a company called N Squared here in Australia. And our mission, our BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goal, is to halve global meeting times. And we think this is actually very achievable, some through technology, but actually a lot of it is through social behavior and changes. So we'll start off this talk talking about some of the problems that we see in meetings, and I'm sure you've seen them all, right? You've probably sat in meetings where you've seen these problems, but just to kind of confirm what we're trying to solve. And then I'm going to take you through a set of processes or procedures or protocols to overcome those problems, to reduce the time you spend in meetings so you can spend more time building great products. Because that's what we really love doing. That's what I love doing, is building great software, building great hardware, delivering products to customers. That's where the fun is. The fun is not sitting in meetings necessarily. But I would say that learning to like meetings is the first step to solving the problem of reducing the amount of time you spend in meetings. And this seems a little bizarre, but bear with me. So the first thing I would say to you is, if you hate meetings, you're probably putting your mind in a state where you're not going to do anything about it. So the way you think about a meeting is potentially going to impact on how your meetings occur and what you do to make meetings better. So I'm going to go through the set of problems to start with. I have no slides, because that's one of my tricks to reducing meeting times, is don't have slides, because there's a huge prep time to getting ready for meetings if you have to make sure you have gorgeous slides. If you don't have to make sure you have gorgeous slides and turn up and expect people to actually listen to what you're saying rather than read the summary on the screen, then you may find you save a bunch of time before the meeting, and that's always good. So one of the problems that I see in a lot of meetings is people are sitting in the meeting wondering why the hell they're in that room. A lot of people come to meetings because they're invited to a meeting without really knowing what the reason for the meeting is or what they expect to get out of it. That's a problem, because that's wasted time for them and potentially wasted time for other people in the room. The second problem is more of a technical problem, but I see it causing huge delays in the start of meetings, and that is, how do I connect to the technology in that room, right? How do I get my laptop to display on this screen? How do I get the teleconferencing system to work? How do I get my content that I didn't know that I was going to need to bring because my manager just asked me 2 seconds ago into that room now? Those technology and connectivity and setup problems are solvable in some technical way, but also solvable in behavioral ways as well. The second problem, or the third problem, I guess I should say, that I see in a lot of meetings, is people walk into the meeting room, and you've probably seen this behavior. They open their laptop and they start appearing to take notes. If you actually look at their screen, they're on IM to their girlfriend, booking dinner tonight. They're busy sorting out their schedule for later on today because they know this meeting's about to run over, because they're delaying it because they're not paying attention because they're answering emails. And so this screen that gets open, this personal device, is actually preventing the meeting from being as fast as it could be, because it's full of distractions. In fact, so is your phone. I always switch off phones in meetings. In fact, in our meeting room where I work, we ban phones. We actually ban all personal devices. You can't bring a phone, a tablet, or a laptop into a meeting room. Streamlines the meeting. If you want to have a conversation, we're going to have a conversation. We're not going to waste time, because that's what we're there for. So personal devices cause interruptions. That's the next problem we want to solve. How do you capture outcomes in a meeting if you don't have your personal device? Well, that becomes another challenge. But actually what I've noticed is even when people do bring their phones and laptops into meetings, often the outcomes of meetings are not well captured, or what one person has is completely opposite to what someone else has written down. Oh, you thought I was going to do that? No, I'm very clear in the meeting. You said you were going to do that. That's what I wrote down. No, you've written down that I'm going to do it. How does that work out? So there's some miscommunication that happens during the meeting or in what you think you're hearing, and so the capture of that outcome is a problem. And then the next thing that happens repeatedly in meetings is focus changes. So the meeting essentially gets derailed. And I'm sure you've seen this. You walk into a meeting, the meeting is about topic A. But in order to solve topic A, you somehow get into the problem with B. And then you spend an hour and a half talking about B, C, D, and E, which are all somehow relating to solving A, and you forget that actually you were there to solve A in the first place. And so the whole thing gets derailed, and you get lost in this weird and wonderful deep rabbit hole of conversation, which sometimes is interesting, but not the point of being there. So those are the problems we've identified as challenges to solve in order to have better meetings. So I'm going to start through my list of protocols of how to have better meetings. The first thing I do is I want to have minimal organizational effort, because actually a lot of effort in meetings happens before the meeting. So what is the minimum amount I can do in a very agile way? I'm thinking, what's the smallest thing I can do to make the test pass? What's the smallest thing I can do to make this meeting work? And often that's not build some wonderful PowerPoint that is super snazzy, but actually just have a set of notes that clearly identify what the problems or decisions that we want to make are in the meeting, and just go through them. And then organizing the meeting can be a challenge too. I'm sure if you're trying to organize a meeting, you've seen this in an organization, you're trying to organize a meeting with 8 or 10 or so people, getting everyone's calendars aligned, that can be a problem. Well, actually, there's a ton of technology that can solve that. So you can use bots, and you can use a ton of online agents. A lot of calendaring systems now solve it as well. So don't waste time manually trying to negotiate meeting times. Find a system that does that for you, and you can just say, I want to have a meeting with these people, and it will go and work out the best time based on everyone's calendars, if it has access to their calendars. There's even some systems that when they don't have access to that calendar because they're an external party, the system will send an email to that person to negotiate with them what the best time is, and then work out based on the calendars it does have access to. So organizing the meeting to start with, once you get to the meeting, what should you do? Well, I find having a protocol for behavior to start the meeting is a great way of getting things moving fast and stopping that initial conversation about what happened last night, or did you see that guy across the road at the supermarket, or did you... All those kinds of conversations need to disappear. And the best way to do that is to start a meeting with a protocol that's called Checkin. And Checkin is really everybody in the room checking into the meeting. And it's very straightforward, and it actually provides a whole bunch of benefits. So the way you check in is you state how you're currently feeling, your current emotional state, emotional state, in terms of 4 emotions: mad, glad, sad, afraid. And then you say you're in, and everyone else says welcome. And everyone just does that in the room very quickly. It just brings everyone to the same level. And you can give a reason if you want. So you might say, I'm really glad to be here. I love sharing information. I'm afraid people won't necessarily hear everything that I'm saying, or may take away the wrong messages. I'm sad because my apartment had a leak last night and there's a hole in the roof that needs to get fixed. I'm in. Everyone says welcome, and the next person stays. Now, what's interesting about the way I just checked in is that I said something that wasn't necessarily relevant to now, but it gives you all a perspective of my state of mind, right? So I have something else going on in the back of my mind about my apartment with a leak in the roof, and you now are aware of that. So if I seem a little short or a little grumpy, maybe it's not because of what you said. Maybe it's because I've been up all night fighting the insurance company about getting the hole fixed or something like that. But it gives you that grounding to get things started. So that's my first tip for you, is ground the team. Get everybody understanding where everybody else is at in the room, and you can do it really, really fast. Like a room of 12 people, you can be done in 5 minutes with a check-in. You saw how quick that can be. The next thing you want to do in a meeting is, again, go around the room and each person state what they want to get out of the meeting. And you could make a list, if you want, on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper in the room of what people are expecting to get out of the meeting. A lot of meetings I go to in the past, people leave because they didn't get what they wanted out of the meeting, but they never said what they wanted. Well, it seems pretty obvious. If you want to get something out of a meeting, you're going to need to state it. So make it a protocol, make it a behavioral pattern within your meeting that you state what you want. So each person. Now, what's interesting about this is sometimes you'll be in a meeting, in fact, quite often, especially with larger groups of people, and people are saying, now, I don't want anything. Well, then get out. Seriously, you're wasting your time. If you don't want anything out of this meeting, you might be wasting your time. Maybe someone will say, no, no, don't leave. I need you to get what I want. So you might not want anything, but you might be a necessary component to what someone else in the room wants. That's a reason to stay. But if you don't want anything out of that meeting, and no one in that room sees any reason or any value that you can contribute to what they want out of the meeting, that's the time to leave. And actually, it's a trick I learned working for a couple of very large organizations in the US, is don't stay in a room any longer than you need to. It's not rude to get up and walk out of a meeting if you no longer see value for you in that room. Now, this is a cultural thing for sure, and you need to learn how to train the culture of the people you're working with, and you can even state it in your meeting at the beginning of meetings to start with so people understand. But you just say, look, I'm here, this is why I'm here, and if I stop seeing any value in me being here, I'm going to get up and leave. Don't take it personally. You guys can carry on, but I'm going to go and carry on doing what I want to do, or other things that I think are more valuable. The third thing, which I've already stated, but I'm going to emphasize again, that you can do to really help you focus, is don't bring your personal devices. Now, this becomes tricky because sometimes you have stuff on those devices that you want to share or that you want to be able to use in the meeting. So how do you solve that? Well, there are ways to solve it. And I'll talk about those in a minute. But I think the first thing to think about is, what do you really need on your device that you can't get some other way? And what is that? Is it a PowerPoint presentation? Is it a document? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it something that's already online? Because if it is, maybe another device can be used to get that without you having your own personal device in the room. The other reason that people, or the other excuse people give for bringing personal devices into a room, is to capture the output. Well, there's two ways of capturing output in a meeting that I think are effective. And actually, one is way more effective than the other. One is you have a formal person who is formally given the task of taking minutes. And actually, traditional old-style meetings, boardroom meetings, typically work that way. Right? There'll be someone who is taking the minutes. And it's that person's responsibility to write everything down. Everyone else is just focused on the conversation. The other way, which we've been using very heavily, is just video every single meeting. Just capture every single meeting within your organization or within your team. GoPros are super cheap compared to the cost of everyone arguing about who said what in a meeting. Well, actually, we can go back and have a look. If you think that you didn't decide that, let's see what you did decide. So it creates a very different atmosphere within the room straight away. In fact, we have a product which we're starting to release now, which is called an intelligent camera, which not just video captures, but also audio transcribes meetings for you to be able to search them. And I was pitching this to a very large company a couple of weeks ago, and they said, can you just sell me the casing? I said, why? So she said, well, if I just put these camera cases in every meeting room, the behavior will change overnight. I don't have to tell them that they're not switched on. So the very fact that people think they're being recorded, their behavior changes, well, that indicates there's probably a problem in the first place that needs to be solved. But I think it's interesting to think that now, what if those casings did have cameras in recording things? What you capture can be incredibly valuable and searchable, right? So why not make it something that's searchable? Now, to solve the problem with bringing personal devices is actually quite solvable. In the total cost of a meeting room setup, most meeting rooms, is to create a shared device, a shared screen. It could be a shared, like just a projected machine or a big screen. Ideally, if you've got lots of money, you buy one of those kind of Surface Hub type things, but it doesn't have to be. And it has a computer that doesn't belong to anybody, but is online. Because most of your content's online, right? Whether it's in Dropbox or OneDrive or SharePoint or wherever it happens to be, you can put your content there. If you want to bring content to a meeting, you can dump your content there, and then you can access it from that shared device. And that shared device, of course, is not logged into your Twitter account. It's not logged into your Facebook. It's not logged into your email, etc. So you won't get all the distractions that you get with personal devices on a shared device. So if you want to create an effective meeting space, and we'll talk more about the environment in a little bit, but if you want to create an effective meeting space, I would definitely recommend you create a space that has shared devices in it, so that it doesn't belong to anyone, it's online, people can access their stuff without having to get interrupted by their personal devices. The next thing is, once you know what everyone in the room wants out of that meeting, because they've stated that at the beginning, you should just work down that list as quick as you can so that everybody is got what they need. Once that happens, the meeting's over. Now, sometimes really organized people will set an agenda beforehand. That's okay. I would write the agenda next to the list of things that people want out of the meeting and make sure it matches up before you start that conversation. So we have on the agenda item A. Does that help anyone get what they want out of the meeting? Yes or no? No. All right, we're not doing that one. Next. And work down the list. It's a very effective way of A, sticking to the agenda, but B, making sure the agenda is actually applicable to the outcomes that people in the room want to get. The next part of this talk or conversation is really around how we make decisions. Because a lot of the reasons we're in meeting rooms with more than one, more than 2 or 3 people, is we need a decision made so that we can decide, or we can determine how to move forward on some action, or what we're, are we going to get everything made in blue, in green, or in red? Let's make that decision. One of the challenges we see with decision making is it's often quite difficult to get everyone to agree to the same thing. And so huge conversations then spill out and stretch the meeting out on, oh yes, but if we do it in blue, then people who like red won't like it, and blah, 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 blah. So we have a trick. It's a protocol. It's a pattern of behavior to overcome this, and it's called the decider. And the way decider works is as follows. Someone has to start the decision making with a proposal. And then everybody votes, and the vote is very simple. It's either I agree with the proposal, it goes ahead. I don't care, so if it goes ahead, it doesn't matter to me. I disagree. So someone makes a proposal, I think we should make this in green. If everyone agrees or doesn't care, it's in green, that's it. End of the conversation, move forward. If anyone has a thumbs down, there's a rule to putting your thumb down. If you put your thumb down, you have to come up with a counter proposal. So if you have your thumb down, you have to say, well, I know people like green, so my proposal is that we make 75% of them green and 25% of them blue. Who's in? And then everyone votes again. And it's a very fast way of getting decisions made. So it does kind of rely on the fact that people have had the conversation prior to know the data. And there's a side on this as well, which is that someone makes a proposal, you say, who's in? At the point that you say who's in, someone can actually stick their hand up and say, I have an investigation. And the investigation should be one and only one question that would help clarify something about the proposal. And at the point of someone having an investigation, you pause the proposal and you answer that question. The person making the proposal is supposed to answer the question. If they can't, then maybe there's a question about the proposal and someone else might want to answer it. Someone else whose thumb is up might want to say, oh, I know the answer to that. And then the proposal goes again. Based on the new information, it might be that the person that originally made the proposal goes, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Okay, I'll adjust my proposal to account for what you just asked in the investigation. Or they may still go, yes, I think it's still valid, and make the proposal again. But it gives the person investigating and possibly everyone else in the room more information so that if they do decide to put their thumb down on it, they have something else to add to their counter proposal. Now, hopefully you can see that as a pattern of behavior in a group of people, you can get decisions made really, really quickly using protocols like this. Now, this is not my invention, by the way. This comes from, both Checkin and Decider come from the core protocols, which originally came from Jim McCarthy, who I worked with at Microsoft in the early 90s. And the core protocols, he wrote a book called Software for Your Head, which is pretty hard to read, I will tell you. But it's worth reading if you can make your way through it. He's quite verbose. He tells lots of great stories through the book. But online, you can look up the core protocols, and there's a list of 12 or so protocols for how teams can work better together. And we take a few of those specifically for meetings. There's even a meeting protocol. And the meeting protocol touches on make sure everyone in the room has stated what they want out of the meeting at the beginning of the meeting. So you can look up the core protocols online, but I really recommend using Decider. One of the great outcomes of using Decider is that everyone in that meeting has now made a unanimous choice for something. How often do you get agreement in a whole group that something should be a certain way? Decider forces that. Yeah?
So with that process, does that mean that it's not like a 50% wins, it's everyone needs to agree?
Everyone is either in or doesn't care. If there's a single thumb down, that thumb down has to make a counter proposal, which will then go through the thumbs up, thumbs down.
So you get a uniform.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you find that counter proposal usually goes on into a large conversation, one of these ones where...
Well, the rule is that you can only ask one question in each investigation. So if you have an investigation, so you say, someone makes a proposal, investigation, my question is, does it matter what color it is, right?
That seems like a nice protocol, but
right.
There will be, I suppose, in your experience, there'll probably be times where it seems like people might have to go away and there might have to be some real investigation other than just a
right.
simple...
So if or no one in the room knows the answer to the investigation, and it sounds like it's a valid question to ask to make the decision, you pause that at that point. So the decision is not made or unmade. It will be brought back in a future meeting. But you don't carry on talking about it. Okay. So you say, oh, that's a great question. I never thought about that. Let me write it down quickly, and I'll come back with another proposal in our next meeting. And then you move on to the next topic, because you can't solve that at that point in time. There's no point in having that conversation at that point in time, because how are you going to solve it if there's external information that's required? Yeah.
What do you do if you encounter like a deadlock situation where you've got a couple of people who strongly believe one proposal is better and the rest believe proposal B is better, and they keep going back and forth?
What I tend to find, so in very small groups, so like 3-4 people, that can be a problem. But what you tend to find in larger groups is there's enough brain power in the room to come up with some kind of compromise where both A and B are happy. And the example is, you know, oh, it must be in red, it must be in green, and then someone comes up, well, why don't we do half in red and half in green? Oh yeah, okay. That's a very simplistic example, just so that we can get over this in this meeting. But the idea is to come up with, what are we actually trying to achieve? And there's actually a whole set of other patterns or technologies that you can build out to create. So what you tend to find in those kind of scenarios, not always, but often, is that one group of people wants one thing, one group of people wants something else, but actually the end result they want is the same. That's why they tend to be working in the same company or in the same organization. Right? They want to ship the product, or they want to, you know, deliver something to the customer. And so you can actually do something which is pulling back from the why they're asking that question and try and identify the whys behind the proposals that are counter to each other. And often you find the whys behind those are actually not different, right? And then the agreement can be made quite quickly. But I would tend to take that offline. I would tend to say, okay, we're at a deadlock. Someone, like if you can't get someone who comes up with a good compromise, and you're bouncing back and forth, but you'll see it very quickly, because you will bounce back and forth between two proposals that are basically against each other. You only need to see that twice, and you're like, okay, stop, we'll come back to this. Yeah.
Do you see like the inverse of that, like potentially like there's kind of like majority rules and just kind of like overrides, you know, maybe like 8 people agree and one person doesn't, and they just kind of go like, well, we don't think this is the way. So.
Well, if the one person doesn't, they have to have a counter proposal. And then the protocol states that it's their turn to make a proposal. I think not quite what you're saying, but what I do see happening sometimes is people are not true to themselves, and so they just put their hand straight rather than their thumb down, because they just want to get on with it. Yeah? But then, to me, that means it's actually not that important to them. Because if it was really important to them and they really cared about it, they would have a counter. So, you know, it's obviously it's a scale, right? So, you know, if it's a 10 out of 10 importance to you, you're probably going to put your thumb down and come up with what you think is the correct proposal. If it's 7 out of 10, maybe it's really not that important to you. So does it really matter? What you've got, though, is clearly the majority, and you've agreed to it. By doing this, you've said, yes, I'll go along with that. As a decision, I'll go along with it. Was there another question back there? Yeah.
If you have 2 thumbs down, do you have any mechanism for which one goes first for a counter proposal?
Usually the loudest, but but what tends to happen is you tend to find that in groups that have worked together for a while, if there's 2 or 3 thumbs down, they're probably the same, right? Not always, but probably. And so they'll make a proposal. It doesn't actually matter. One person makes the counter proposal, and you can watch. You can see if the 2 people who had their thumbs down before, the other 2 put their thumbs up on that proposal, then you're okay. But if it's still not, someone can still put a thumb down and go, actually, I have a better proposal. Yeah. Well, because the next proposal that goes around, if you still don't agree with it, you'll still be thumbs down. So you'll be the next one on the list. Yeah.
So with the investigate, are you saying that for any given round or any given proposal, there's one investigation or one per person? Or how do you stop like?
Yeah, one investigation and then re-propose. Then another person can make an investigation.
And it has to be a thumbs down to investigate?
No. An investigation is someone makes a proposal and you say, I propose blah, 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 who's in? And at that point, everyone thumbs up, thumbs down. But someone else, the other thing you can do is stick your hand up and say investigation. I want to ask a question about this. And what's interesting to me is the teams I've worked with that do this now start to use the term investigation or the behavior of investigation through all kinds of other things that they're doing. So they'll sit with each other writing story cards out with the customer and they'll go, oh, investigation. And everyone in the room understands the protocol, so it's very clear what's happening at that point. It wasn't even a proposal being made, but someone used the term investigation and everyone's quiet because they want to hear the question and want to hear the answer. So that is just a mechanism of behavioral change. And by a lot of what happens in meetings is human interaction, right? It's social behavior. And so what we're trying to do is to optimize that in ways that we normally don't, like, you know, socially, we don't have a mandate when we get together to have a beer or have pizza together or, you know, play games or go and watch football. We don't have a mandate that this has to be over as quickly as possible. And so our natural social behavior is to kind of meander around conversations and have long, you know, winded diversions into all kinds of other interesting things that we're all fascinated about, rather than keep to the point. And what we're trying to do is create spaces in the corporate world where people keep to the point. My next point is really around, is the meeting actually necessary? And I wrote a LinkedIn post about this not long ago, and lots of people have, but should this meeting have been an email, right? And I think you see this quite a lot where, you know, so-and-so is so important that they decide to have a meeting to show you something that they could have sent in an email. And so what we tend to do in those kind of scenarios, if you see a meeting and you think it falls into that category, the response is, can I have an agenda, please? And what do you want to get out of this meeting? So before the meeting even starts, ask the question of what you want to get out of the meeting. And if it's, oh, I need to show you this thing, you go, well, can you just send me a link? Yeah.
Have you had any success trying to like async poll these before you go into the meeting, like over Slack or something like that? People check in and state what their outcome was, and you pretty.
Well, that's what. So you'll start to get, as you start doing more of this, you start to get a gut feeling that, oh yeah, another one of those meetings. Okay. And so you respond straight away. Before you accept the meeting, you respond saying, what do you want out of the meeting? What's the agenda? And that's the organization piece, the precursor, which you can then say, oh, that's great, I'd love to see it. Just, can you send it to me? Rather than, let's have a 1 hour meeting discussing this. So look out for those things, and you can preempt them. You can preempt those meetings that should have been emails quite easily. And the more you have valid meetings, the easier it is for you to identify non-valid meetings. And I think this is one of the challenges, is that we're not very conscious most of the time of what is a valid meeting and what is not a valid meeting, and measuring it. And actually, one of the things we've got like most agile teams, I guess, we've got tons of dashboards in our dev space. One of our dashboards is a meeting statistic dashboard, which shows the effectiveness of meetings over the week. So we're actually measuring how effective the people in the meeting thought the meeting was, and giving it a green box if we thought it was 100% and a red box if it wasn't, if it was 0%, and we have a scale.
What other criteria do you use to sort of measure success?
Well, so there's technical criteria and there's timing criteria that we're using at the moment. And then there's also, did everyone get what they wanted out of the meeting? So technical criteria is how much time was spent dealing with technical problems in the meeting. So if you spend the first 10 minutes trying to get a laptop connected to a screen, it's not a good meeting, right? So that's not going to be green. If everyone gets what they want out of a meeting, it's likely to be green. If no one gets what they want out of a meeting, it's going to be red. And then the meeting was set for an hour, but it finished in 30 minutes. That's great. The meeting was set for 30 minutes and it took 90 minutes. That's bad. So we use those criteria for tracking. And we've automated a whole bunch of it, which makes life a whole bunch easier as well. Has anyone done lean coffee? Has anyone, yeah, a couple of you have come across lean coffee. Lean coffee is a brilliant idea, and you can use this and you can pull it into various stages of a meeting or make a whole meeting out of a lean coffee meeting. So the principle behind lean coffee is as follows. Get a bunch of cards or post-it notes, and you spend the first couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes, depending how many people are in the room, writing down, a bit like the what you want out of the meeting, but writing down topics that you want to have conversation on. And you stick them all on the table. And then you spend a couple of minutes where everyone grabs a pen or pencil and puts a mark on all the ones that they care about, or maybe they're given a criteria of maybe you only have 5 marks, or you only have 3 marks, depending on the length of the meeting, the number of people as well. And then the items with the most marks are started with. And you time box. So you say, okay, we have 10 minutes to talk about this item, and you time box it. And you set a timer, a very visible timer in the space, to either get a decision or discuss or whatever it is that's on the card. And once that time is up, done. Next. You take the next most high priority one, the one that has the most. You can look up lean coffee online, but it's a great little technique, and I've used it effectively a number of times for creating a space where you time box the meeting and you say we have 1 hour. That means we're going to get through maybe 5 10-minute topics. And then there might be 15 topics on the table. Well, the ones that everyone or people have put more marks next to are the ones that are going to get addressed first. Of course, you want to monitor that, because a 10-minute time box, you don't want the last 5 minutes of that talking about last night's football game, right? So if you do get to a conclusion, move on. Stop, you're done with that one. Great, move on.
What's the link to coffee?
I don't know why it's called lean coffee. I think it's just because people grab a cup of coffee and they want to move fast through the meeting. But they're called lean coffee meetings. I'm sure there's a reason for it. But there's a wiki page online somewhere for lean coffee, and you can find out how to run a lean coffee meeting. But I would suggest, if you have those kind of a bunch of topics to discuss by a bunch of people, it's a great way of running that meeting and keeping it within a time. So my next topic is about attending meetings. We've kind of had this conversation assuming that we're all in the same room, but often that's not the case, right? Like, I'm sure a lot of you are working with people remotely. We have a team in Japan, we have a team in Hong Kong, and so we have to have Skype meetings or Teams meetings or whatever technology you end up using to have those meetings. You have these conversations. So your meeting request that goes out to people has a link to join this meeting online. Now, there's an anti-pattern that I see happening, and this is something to watch out for, where there's a guy who is like 3 doors down that corridor who joins online instead of coming into the room. Oh, I'm super busy. I'm just going to join the meeting online. Well, how important is this meeting to you? Let's disconnect that guy, because he can walk here in under a minute if he really wants to be in the meeting. Now, one of the reasons we don't allow that is also because we know what people are doing when they're attending remotely and they don't need to, is they are typically on their personal device, tapping away, answering emails, writing code while listening into the meeting. Now, one of the great things about recording meetings is you can just say to them, if you don't want to be here, that's fine, it's recorded, you can watch it later. So if you just want to catch up on what's happened in the meeting, you can actually do it in less time, because you can push fast forward through the boring bits. Yeah.
Do you have a protocol for them integrating something that they would add that they've caught up on after
Usually just goes on a Teams channel or a Slack channel or an email. There's no set protocol for that. But if they're not willing to walk 3 doors down to sit in the room, their contribution doesn't count. Well, okay. What did I do? Someone didn't like that. So look out for those people that refuse to attend in person when they are very able to attend in person, and get them to come. Yeah.
One rule I've read that sort of made sense, it sort of contradicts what you just said, is that when you're dealing with remote meetings, if one person is remote, then all are remote, so that everyone is effectively even, so that the people in the room, the subtle interactions are not missed by those people who are remote. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I don't actually agree with that. We have remote teams. When we get, and we do sometimes do a complete team meeting, like everybody is either in the room physically or virtually. Anyone that's in the Sydney office should be in the room. And we find it way more effective. And it's actually more effective for the people watching online as well, because they see the human interaction between the people. There's, depending on which research you read, there's a huge amount, somewhere between 70 and 95% of human conversation is non-verbal, right? You see hand movements, you see body postures, you see the way people look at each other. And if you are observing that in a group, you can start to pick up things that you wouldn't pick up if everybody is online. And actually, if that group in, say, our soccer team has a camera on them, and we can see the interactions between those people as well, that's interesting for us in the Sydney team. And so now maybe it's because we have groups, clusters of people, rather than lots of single individuals, that it's different. But seeing the interactions, the physical body interactions between people creates, I believe, a richer interaction for the whole team. And it's very, very difficult in video meetings, and this is why we still have in-person meetings and people still jump on airplanes to fly around the world. It's very difficult to have the same experience, still I would say impossible, that you get when you're in a room with someone as opposed to online with someone. You miss a whole bunch of the non-visual verbal cues that happen from people interaction. But of course, I mean, I might not be right. I think, if you find that for you and your team, online meetings is better when everyone is on their own device and online, then that's what works for you. But how do you know that? So then I would say you start to measure it. And that's where I think, like, we're very good as software developers and technologists. We tend to put a lot of emphasis on measuring the outcomes of what we do, right? And measuring, is this code robust? What's the code coverage of the tests? What's the, bug report count? How many bugs get fixed each week, etc. We're measuring all these things, but we're not measuring the activities that lead to some of these things happening. And so you need to take a step back and start measuring some of those and validating, when I have an online meeting with 3 people that are online and the rest are in the same space, is the meeting better when I've got everyone in the same room except for those 3 people? Or is it better when everyone's, like, how do you measure that? Think of ways that you can measure it and then start measuring it. And it wouldn't take long to find out for your team. And every team is different. The disadvantage I always think of remote meetings with individuals on their personal devices is the fact they are on their personal device. So if you can, again, for those teams that are remote, if you can create shared spaces for them where they have a shared machine that has a camera on it, so they can not be on their personal device but on the shared machine to have a conversation, then you don't have those distractions. Which kind of brings me back to this conversation around environment. What are you doing to create environments where people can have better conversations and gather, not just in formal meetings that are well organized and prepared beforehand, but also ad hoc? Like, there's often occasions, I'm sure you get this, right? It's the whiteboard meeting, it's the water cooler talk, it's the, oh, you know what? I was just thinking about this. I'd love to go through. Have you got 10 minutes now to just brainstorm this? Do you have spaces that enable that in a way that captures them and digitally enables people without bringing their own device to get their stuff into that room? So like most of your stuff's probably on GitHub or some repo of online that you can get. You don't necessarily need to bring your laptop in, right? You can just do a pull on a shared machine if you want to go through some code. So creating those environments will actually lead to optimized spaces for both formal, traditional, what you might call meetings, versus ad hoc as well, where you can just bring someone in. And one of the things we're looking at is, can we auto-record, so have spaces like that, but as soon as more than one person walks in, so 2 or 3 people walk in and start having a conversation, switch on the camera automatically. So we're detecting that people are in the room, we're recording it. That means that meeting is now recorded, even though it's an ad hoc 15-minute conversation about something. But those people can then review it afterwards and go through, rather than worrying about, oh, now how do I save this? How do I capture this? What did you say? Let me write that down. It's all recorded and on the internal system. So getting towards the end, but there's a couple of items I want to talk through. The first one is transparency, and I think this is probably the hardest thing for a lot of people. And scariest. It's probably hard because it's scary. So how do you create an environment which is truly transparent? And the reason it's scary is because we all have secrets, right? In fact, the word privacy in many languages doesn't exist. There's just the word secrecy. And so this concept of privacy, this concept of what is private and what is not, like, we have cameras in our meeting rooms and people will go, oh, but isn't that scary? Like, what if you need to have a meeting that's private? What kind of meeting do you need to have that you don't want the rest of your organization knowing? Should you really be even having that meeting? Like, how open can you afford to be? And what I've found is, by kind of taking the fear away and saying, okay, let's imagine this does work, let's see what happens, and experimenting, is that actually a lot of the problems you think are going to happen never happen at all. And actually, more information is always better. So having a hard conversation with someone because their performance isn't great and having it recorded, and both of you can review it. So one of the things we do is you can only see a meeting that's happened that you've either attended or someone in your team directly below you, so someone you manage, has been part of. So I can see meetings that anyone that I manage was in, but I can't see meetings in a peer team unless I was invited to it and attended it. So say you have that hard conversation with someone about their performance not being great. Well, both you and that person can review the meeting afterwards, and our managers can review that meeting afterwards. It actually makes that meeting very, very different. The conversation is often very different. The way you have the conversation is different. People tend not to get quite so angry. People are a bit more thoughtful about what they say and how they say things. So what we found is that more information tends to be better. We've never found problems occur because people have more than enough information. We have problems occur because people don't have enough information. And of course, it's up to you, but if at some point you want to share that video, you can do that. You can share a meeting afterwards and say, yeah, I'd like you to review this. Now, for some organizations, this actually starts to become a compliance issue in a positive way, because, oh, well, you know, I had my conversation with so-and-so, and they told me this, and no, he says, he said, you said. Well, actually, we can now validate that. We can actually see who said what. And did someone misbehave in a meeting room? Did someone swear at someone in a way that's considered offensive, or was racist or sexist or whatever? And so the transparency to us is actually something that we think is positive, and potentially, if we get this right, could open up a whole new set of opportunities in terms of how we as people engage with each other. It does mean that, and it probably putting some of you outside your comfort zone right now. That's what I do. I love putting people outside their comfort zone. It's how we grow, right? It's how we learn. It's how we stretch ourselves to do new and great things, is put ourselves outside our comfort zone. So think about what really needs to be secret or private within your organization, and then break it. And just try some things. So my last point, and then I'll take some more questions, about how to have good meetings is something that a lot of you have been doing, hopefully, through this hour, and that's listen. Just sometimes it's good to not be the big mouth in the room and just shut up and listen to what other people say. And you learn how other people think and what their opinions are. And in fact, it's interesting to me that in performance reviews, some of the things I've been saying to people is shut up. You talk too much in meetings. Let other people have something to say. Because there are very clear, alphas in groups, right? And those alphas tend to be the people that are like, yeah, we should do this. Everybody follow me. We're going this way. And then there's, other people who are like, yeah, I suppose so. What you want to hear is their opinions. You want to start to listen to everybody. Now, some of the protocols we have actually force that, right? Like Checkin forces everybody to say something. What I want out of the meeting forces everybody to say something. So even the very shy people start to talk. And often it's just the starting to talk gives them enough confidence to have bigger conversations. Some of the best investigations in deciders in our group come from the people that generally wouldn't be considered alphas, but are quiet thinkers. And they have great questions. And giving them a protocol to ask those questions with investigation enables us to come up with better solutions. So stop and listen for a little bit. So I'm hoping that some of these techniques you can take away and start working with and start improving the way you have meetings. And like I said, my goal is that all meeting times are cut in half. And I think you can do it. I actually think maybe it's not ambitious enough. We actually have been doing some experiments where we took all the meetings we had in our calendar for the next month and just halved the times on them and reset them. And saw what happened. And what happened, of course, is people go, shit, I've only got 15 minutes. Right, this is what we've got to do. We've got to decide on what we're going to do here. Rather than, oh, this is a 30-minute meeting, plenty of time. So the behavior changes. So just think about, does that 30-minute meeting really need to be 30 minutes because that's what Outlook lets you set as a meeting time, right? Maybe it could be 15 minutes. Does that 1 hour meeting need to be an hour, or could it be 30 minutes? And start squashing the time down. And what I've found is that by doing that, meetings actually become more enjoyable because you're like, oh yeah, let's go and solve that. Let's do it and then get out. And so that's why the topic is called Learn to Love Meetings. Because I believe as you start doing some of these things, meetings become more enjoyable. They become interactions with real outcomes that are trackable over time. So that's the end of my talk. Any questions? Yes.
You don't allow personal devices. Do you allow pen and paper, or does recording the meetings negate that meeting?
It's very dependent on the individual. Some people bring pen and paper. Some people bring a stack of cards, post-it notes. Depends how people want. But the primary reason for not allowing personal devices is the disruption that they bring into the space, right? And in fact, we now have a bigger problem, and we're starting to work out how to address this, which is most people are wearing a disruption on their wrist, right? So yeah, my phone is next door in the other room, but And so, what do we do about that? So we've started doing things like, set your phone to flight mode when you walk into a meeting. So then, because most of them are coming through the phone, so then you don't get those distractions.
I'm more asking about note-taking.
Yeah. So a lot of the time we use the recording of the meeting and the transcript rather than needing to take notes. But we do two other things. One is people do bring bits of paper or cards or whatever, but the shared devices are where we capture the outcome. And then that gets emailed to everybody that was in the room. Right? So you want to take notes, you want to sketch something out. We have a digital whiteboard we can sketch things on. We have a number of technology solutions within our meeting space that enable us to walk in, sketch stuff out, bring up content, have conversations, and save that and email it or put it in a shared drive somewhere for everyone to access after the meeting. So we tend to do it in those spaces. I mean, this morning I have had 2 meetings so far this morning. I had a stand-up meeting with my Sydney team. We have a shared digital table that we stand around, which has our Jira sprint on it. Everyone quickly goes around, they check in, they go through what they've done, what they're doing today, any blocks. And then we had some blocks that we parked and addressed afterwards. We actually just sketched some stuff out directly on the screen on the table and emailed it to everybody. And then my other meeting was at a Surface Hub, which we whiteboarded a few ideas on some designs and emailed them at the end of the meeting to everybody that attended. And so we didn't need to bring devices. So the technology is there, and there is clearly a cost to some of that technology. But the effectiveness that it gives you, I think when you look at the total time, and this is something, I didn't address it, but one thing I used to do a lot in meetings, especially when you walk into meetings with executives or managers, highly paid people, is you write down the cost of every 10 minutes that you spend in that room based on how many people and their average salary. It makes people think a lot harder about how much time they spend. Oh shit, this meeting is costing us a lot of money. Yeah.
Just sort of to add to what you're saying about the flight mode, I can't remember the name of it, but there's like a movement based around distraction-free mode, and when you put your phone on car mode,
Yes.
On there, you can automatically send a message back, and you can put some blurb about how you're in a meeting,
Yep.
something like that, so people that are trying to get you would be advised of the context there.
Yeah. And there's software you can get as well that looks at your calendar and detects you're in a meeting and then blocks everything. There's Windows has focus mode that you can set your laptop to, and it stops all distractions coming in. And then at the end of the period, it actually brings up a whole set of notifications, everything you missed. Mac does something similar now.
This applies to people trying to get you while you're in the meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, actually, it blocks all tweets and anything else that you have, all your pop-up boxes and everything else. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, so I was just a little bit curious. A lot of the stuff you talked about is kind of around about optimizing stuff that's more quantitative, things that you can measure. I'm wondering if you have any sort of non-negotiables that you don't want to lose that are maybe less measurable by, optimizing in that way. So, you can get through a list of things that you want to talk and people can cover what you want. But is there anything around things that are less measurable, perhaps like the social cohesion in the group or the relationship that they build with each other, small things like a bit of small talk before a meeting? Is there anything that you think is really important to the health of an organization that you don't want to lose?
That's a great question, and it's very difficult to know whether you're doing the right thing when it's not measurable. Of course, I'm focused on the measurable things because my goal is to halve meeting times, right? So I want to focus on that. I think that there are other places to have those conversations and that social engagement, right? So I think during a meeting where some of the people are busy trying to do something else, but they know they're needed to help solve a problem, you want to minimize the amount of time they spend. But to solve the social problem of how people interact, that's done different ways, I think. I think I would address that, and I think it's not that it doesn't happen. Like, often our whole team will have lunch together, right? That's not a meeting. It's just we're going to go and get food together. And that creates that more social engagement that I think is important. I think, like, going, doing events together, going for drinks together, whatever it is that you're doing.
That would work well with your team. So, you know, if you're having meetings with your team, you
Yep.
know, team events like that. But a lot of the meetings I'm in are with people in the organization that I don't see frequently.
Mhm.
I wouldn't have a natural connection with. I'd have to actually go out and try and arrange something social. So it is actually a great opportunity for me to sort of touch with them and sort of see how they're going in small things that might not be the context
Yep.
that I mean, I largely agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying there are small nuances.
Yeah, of course there are, and that's human behavior. And I think sometimes that, you know, if you see that opportunity and you go, oh, you know, I'd really love to have a chat with that guy and catch up with him. And I've done that recently with a few different meetings that I've been in other organizations that we consult with, where I've just said, you know, drop me an email afterwards. I'd love to catch up for a coffee. Or I'd send them an email. Or I'd just connect them on LinkedIn and have a LinkedIn, you know, conversation that ends up at lunch or something. But yeah, I think those things are important. I wouldn't want to lose those, but they don't necessarily belong in the first 10 minutes of your meeting. And in fact, you can make the next meeting better by having that coffee in between where you connect with those people. Yeah.
In line with that, I guess the talk around the table that starts with a bit of social lubricant and get people speaking. Have you tried some kind of like icebreaker protocol to mix?
Well, that's what Checkin is.
A little bit more
Yeah.
personal.
Well, that's what Checkin is. Checkin is very personal. I gave you information about my apartment that you wouldn't have had, right? But it's a very formal way of doing it, and it means everybody checks in, and not like just the alphas check in with, oh, how's it going? I haven't seen you for ages, blah, 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 blah. But everybody gets to say how they're feeling and where they're at that point. Yeah.
Do you use the check-in for a daily stand-up?
We do, yes.
And do you also ask if people, like what people want to get out of the stand-up, or do you just assume
No.
that that's...
So the stand-up is quick, like, you know, less than, we have a rule less than 2 minutes per person. It's usually a lot less. It's often less than a minute. We actually have a timer that runs on the screen during a stand-up. People check in and say what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, any blockers. That's it.
So you, but you still check in as in...
So you check in. Yeah. And so you just, I mean, it's not necessarily go around the room. People do it as they feel like it's their turn to check in, and then they do it. Yeah.
I'm going through the discovery and reception phase for Roodyn, a new piece of software, and that is, we're going through lots of workshops at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you have a distinction between what you call a meeting versus what you call a workshop, and if you have a separate set of recommendations for running a workshop.
Yeah, well, workshops can be different things. So they can be brainstorming sessions. But what I would identify is, what do I want to get out of this workshop? Right? And so it's not that you shouldn't have a 3-hour workshop. Sometimes you need to have a 3-hour workshop. Or a full day workshop, or maybe a 3-day workshop. I don't know. But do you have clear outcomes that you're expecting to get out of it? And are they well identified? And is everyone in the workshop aligned with what you're trying to get out of it? Those would be the questions I would ask. Yeah, there's lots of different types of engagement and meetings. And they're not necessarily always about making a decision or sharing information. They could be about brainstorming and coming up with new ideas. And that's valid too. But again, using the protocols will enhance that. If I'm doing a multi-day workshop, I'll often do a check-in at the beginning of the morning and then straight after lunch, so that everybody resets and everybody gets an opportunity to re-engage. There was a question at the back. Yes.
What's your suggestion? You said that you're working on like a transcription technology. Can you give us a 1-minute pitch on that, or?
Go to intelligentmeetingroom.com. That's my 1 second sales pitch. Yeah, go to intelligentmeetingroom.com. You'll see what we're doing. Yeah.
How do you handle people who are vital to the meeting but arriving late? Because that's normally when the small talk starts.
Yes, because you're waiting for people to. Yeah. So we tend to be very focused on. We start the meeting on the start time.
Yeah. But obviously that isn't always. And in that situation,
Yeah.
I'm curious. Really interesting ideas. I'm just wondering your scenario, what you do. Would you let the small talk start, or
No.
would you be like, everybody shut up. We're not going to talk until.
No, and in fact, it becomes a team behavior. It's not would I let. The team just starts the meeting. If I'm not there and I'm the manager, and if I'm 5 minutes late, they're already into it. And what happens is I'll walk in. The expectation is I will check in at that point. So they'll all pause for a second. I'll check in, and then they carry on the conversation. So yeah, and again, it's not up to one person to drive that. What you start doing is you start pulling all these protocols together, is people see, oh, well, this is how we run meetings, and then they just start.
I was just thinking more about the time when there's a vital person that needs to be there. And there's no point starting until they actually.
I would ask.
Definitely happens.
Yeah, I'm sure it does, and I'm trying to think of scenarios where, like, if you're presenting something to that person, or pitching something to that person, then you're kind of blocked at that point.
And that's all good.
Yeah.
I liked your question about, do you categorize? Is there certain types of meetings where this works for these type of meetings, but not these other ones?
Yeah, and it's also valid to correct that person, right? To say, this meeting was scheduled to start at 11 a.m. and it's 10 past 11. You just wasted this much time of everybody's. And actually, the great thing to do, again, is just put a number on it, especially if they're a manager. Like, if they're a senior person that you're pitching to, they're essentially responsible for your payroll, right? Often, or somehow it rolls up to them, they have to sign it off or whatever, and you just say, you just wasted X thousand dollars.
That'd be great if it was automated in the corner. And
Yeah.
You see the cost of
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah.
That would be a really interesting.
All right, I think we have to wrap up. Thanks, guys.